Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and this is going to be a conversation with Cookie because there's a couple of things that have developed in recent events that I really wanted to talk about. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the arrest of two suspects who were allegedly involved in the murder of Jam Master Jay. Also known as Jason Mizell, who is the DJ of the iconic rap duo Run DMC. Now, Jam Master Jay was murdered back in 2002 in Queens. He was basically ambushed in his recording studio and shot and killed. And I remember when the news came out, it was just so shocking because unlike the deaths of Tupac and Biggie Smalls, who were kind of like... they had that East Coast, West Coast thing, and they would always go back and forth. It wasn't, I'm not going to say that their murders were expected, but the beef was so heavy. And, you had Tupac and Biggie, and then you kind of put in the mix, Suge Knight, who was, very scary person. And it was sort of like their murders were like a culmination of this East Coast, West Coast battle. Run DMC, they were not involved in that. They were not seen as gangster rappers. They didn't rap about living that life, of drug dealing and killings and all this other stuff. They were sort of like, peaceful rappers. They were very mainstream rappers because I remember they did a song with the rock band Aerosmith, Walk This Way. So they were kind of like pretty mainstream. They crossed the color boundary. So you had white kids, Hispanic kids, all kinds of people were into Run DMC. They were very commercial in a way. They were very, very commercial. Unlike your gangster rappers of NWA, Tupac, and Biggie, Run DMC was a little bit more commercialized. And so when the news came out that Jam Master Jay was murdered, it was just like, what? How? Who? Why? And it was another unsolved murder. It was just like with Pac and Biggie, unsolved murders. And it was just so strange because they were not, Run DMC, they were not involved in any kind of beef with anybody, any kind of battle with anybody. There was no reports of them committing crimes or, living that life. So it was just really strange that somebody in their group was just murdered in cold blood. And it wasn't a robbery. It didn't talk about it being a robbery or some kind of a love triangle. There was just no rhyme and reason at all to his murder. Well, here we are 18 years later, and two people have been arrested for his murder. It took 18 years. They are Carl Jordan Jr. and Ronald Washington. Both of them were indicted on 10 counts, one of them including, I guess, the murder of Jam Master Jay. So now we find out that Jam Master Jay was living the life. He was living that lifestyle because this was evidently a drug deal gone bad. So there was a deal for Jam Master Jay. He was involved in a drug distribution deal of 10 kilos of cocaine, and Ronald Washington and Carl Jordan were all supposed to be part of this deal. It was a multi-state drug distribution deal of distributing cocaine in I don't know how many states. So Carl Jordan and Ronald Washington were in on this deal, including Jam Master Jay, but some dispute erupted between the guys, and Jam Master Jay cut out Carl and Ronald. So they were cut out of the deal. So they were upset about it, because that's money that they're not making. So they were upset about it, and they exacted their revenge on him by showing up in his studio one night and shooting him in the head. Now, the person who actually pulled the trigger was Carl Jordan Jr. He was the younger of the two. At the time, he was 18 years old. The other murder suspect was Ronald Washington. At the time, he was somewhere in his 30s. I think he was like 36 years old or something like that. So throughout the years, there were a lot of reports being made of what happened. One particular witness in 2015 had told the cops this person was a witness to Jam Master Jay's murder. He actually told the police what happened that night. The police took that information to the DA. For whatever reason, the DA of Queens didn't want to pick up the case because I guess they felt like it wasn't sufficient evidence to move a case forward based on one witness's story. So the cops took it to the feds. The feds picked up the case, and here we are 5 years later with the arrest of Ronald Washington and Carl Jordan. So, and the funny thing about it is that I also had read that I think it was Robert Washington who was, him and Jam Master Jay evidently were friends because he was living in Jam Master Jay's, one of his homes. I don't know if it was his main home or one of his other homes, but Jam Master Jay provided him a place to sleep. And this guy turns around and is involved in his murder. So it's just unbelievable. It's just so unbelievable. When I was reading all the articles about this case, it was just so, first of all, I was just shocked. And I know, okay, I'm probably going to sound extremely naive, really, completely not aware of the world. But I was a little bit shocked that Jam Master Jay was involved in, in drug dealing on that level, a multi-state drug distribution deal. And that really shocked me because, they appeared, to be like really positive, entertainers, positive rappers, and I was just surprised about that. Now, Jam Master Jay, he was a positive influence in his community. I had also read that in 2002 he started up Scratch DJ Academy, which was like an academy for young kids to learn how to DJ. One of the rumors of why Jam Master Jay was murdered, and it was completely unfounded, but one of the rumors I was kind of swirling around at the time was that the gunman was upset with 50 Cent. He has some type of beef with 50 Cent, and in order to get back at 50 Cent, he kills Jam Master Jay because Jam Master Jay is credited for having discovered 50 Cent. Jam Master Jay had a brother who was very vocal about his murder. The brother was reported giving a statement saying that Jam Master Jay felt like there were just nothing but leeches around him, and he just really wanted to separate himself, from everybody, because I guess he felt like everybody was just out to use him. And his brother had made a statement about that. His brother ended up dying in 2018. His sister passed away in 2018. His poor mom died in 2019. So his relatives died without ever knowing what happened, or if they did know what happened, they died without ever seeing these individuals brought to justice. And that's really sad, because it took 18 years. So he's left behind his widow and his 3 kids. It was actually Washington that was living on Jam Master Jay's couch. And Washington himself, this is the one, by the way, Washington was already in prison when these arrests were made for Jam Master Jay's murder. He was already serving time in federal prison for a string of robberies that he had committed in Queens. Now, he was also the one that slept on Jam Master Jay's couch, and he was also rumored to be a suspect in the murder of Randy Walker. Randy Walker was a very close associate of Tupac. So he was murdered, and Mr. Washington was one of the main suspects in his murder. But there wasn't enough evidence, I guess, to move forward, so nothing ever happened with that situation. So 18 years later, we have a conclusion to this case, which I remembered so vividly when the news came out that Jam Master Jay was killed, because it didn't make any sense at all. No sense at all. And he was only 37 when he died. I'm way, way older than that. And that just seems like such a young age to lose your life. I don't know if there's any reports on Run DMC's reaction, Reverend Run and DMC. I don't know if there's any what they've said about this, if anything at all, but we can only imagine that they're probably also relieved that justice is going to be served for Jam Master Jay's murder. And it's just really sad, but that chapter hopefully soon closing for his family, especially for his kids. So I wanted to talk about that, and I also wanted to talk about Sweetie Pie. So Sweetie Pie, it was a show that premiered on the OWN network. I didn't watch it that much. I remember seeing bits and pieces of it, but it really didn't pique my interest. But I clearly remember the people on the show. The main person was Sweetie Pie herself. Her name was Robbie. And I didn't know this, but Robbie she performed with Ike and Tina Turner. I didn't know that. I didn't watch the show. Maybe the whole world knows it but me. But I didn't know that she used to perform with Ike and Tina Turner. So Sweetie Pie herself has a son, and his name is James Timothy Norman. James Timothy Norman was also a co-owner of Sweetie Pie, so he was also on the show quite a bit. I remember seeing him. I remember seeing Sweetie Pie herself on the show, and I remember there was a young guy. I don't know if that's the victim in this case or if that was someone else, but I remember seeing a much younger guy also on the show, and I think it was her grandson, but I don't know if that's the guy on the case. Anyways, James Timothy Norman was arrested recently for the murder of not Timothy Montgomery. He was arrested for the murder of Andre Montgomery. In 2014, Andre was 18 years old, and he was killed, and his murder was also unsolved until now. Now we find out that James Timothy Norman conspired to have his own nephew murdered for money. Mr. Norman had put out several life insurance policies on his nephew. I don't know if his nephew was aware of these life insurance policies or not, but Mr. Norman had taken out several life insurance policies on his nephew. The total amount was $700,000. So he conspires with this woman who was a stripper. I don't know if she's a current stripper or an ex-stripper, but he conspires with this woman. Her last name is Ellis. I think it was Terica or Tarika Ellis. So they have this conspiracy. I don't know if other people were involved or not, but they had conspired to murder Andre Montgomery. The situation was days before this 18-year-old kid was murdered, there was a lot of communication between Miss Ellis and Mr. Norman. Miss Ellis at the time was in Memphis, Tennessee. So she had called the victim, Andre Montgomery, and told him that she was coming down to St. Louis to see him. So after that was confirmed, she gets to St. Louis. During this whole time, she's also communicating with Mr. Norman. So once they confirm exactly where the victim, Mr. Montgomery, was going to be located, that day, the day that she arrived, I think, or a day or two after she arrived, he ends up being murdered. There's a lot of communication by phone between Miss Ellis and Mr. Norman before the murder, and a lot of communication between them after the murder. So he's actually being charged with conspiracy to use interstate commerce facilities, which are cell phones, in the commission of a murder for hire and the death of 18-year-old Andre Montgomery. Money was exchanged between Miss Ellis and Mr. Norman. I don't know if she was the one that ended up killing the boy or if someone else killed the boy. I wasn't able to get that cleared up. But the point is this: I just cannot believe that this man, Mr. Norman, conspired to have his own nephew killed for $700,000. The boy was murdered in 2014. I think he collected on those insurance policies. In 2015, he was trying to collect on another insurance policy, but the insurance company did not shell out the money because they saw too many inconsistencies in the report. So I don't know if that's what led to the cops stepping in and investigating the situation. I don't know who blew the whistle, but I'm just shocked that someone on TV, on a very famous show, on a well-known show, is now charged with a conspiracy to commit murder on his 18-year-old nephew. In 2016, Sweetie Pie, or Miss Robbie herself, she had paid tribute to her grandson. She had announced that her grandson was murdered and that they did not know, who the killers were or what happened. Well, now we know. It was her own son because Mr. Norman is Sweetie Pie's son. I'm talking as if, like I'm not really clear on who these people are because I never really watched the show. I only saw bits and pieces of it. I do remember, like I said before, Miss Robbie. I remember Timothy, and I remember there was a young man on the show as well. I don't know if that was the guy that was killed or not. I hope that wasn't the guy that was killed. So it's just really sad. Really sad, what family members will do to each other what friends will do to each other. In the case of Jam Master Jay, you know, being murdered by someone who, I don't know, I guess he saw as a friend. He saw him as a friend enough to allow him to sleep on his couch when this guy had nowhere else to go. And all over money. They murdered Jam Master Jay because of a drug deal that had gone wrong. Now, you know, we hear that Sweetie Pie's nephew or her grandson was killed because her son took out life insurance policies on him for money. Now, what I don't understand is the show wasn't paying enough. Weren't you on a, you know, you're on a well-known show. It wasn't paying enough. Now you have to go and murder or conspire to murder your own nephew. Now, because he didn't actually do the murder, I don't know how the boy was killed. I don't know if he was shot. I think he was shot. Even though he didn't pull the trigger, his actions led to the murder of his nephew. So he's going to face just as much time, if not more, than the person who actually pulled the trigger. I can't wait to find out who that was. Maybe it's already out in the news, but I just haven't read upon it yet. But it's just really sad. What a sad week. You know, these well-known people, iconic people, you know, finding out, you know, being reminded of their murders, but in a good way, because, you know, we're getting closure. The family are getting closure on what happened to these people. So that's all I wanted to say. Just a quick little conversation with Miss Cookie here. And yeah, that's it. So once again, rest in peace, Jam Master Jay, and hopefully rest in peace to Andre Montgomery. Talk to you later. Bye.